Hey, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Kirk here with another note lecture on the federal government. Today, we're going to be looking at checks and balances specifically, and how checks and balances helps to limit the power of the other branches. All right. Let's go over our essential question first, this right here. Today, we're going to be looking at how does the system of checks and balances limit government power? So this is an example of the fundamental principle of limited government, which comes from SOL 2D. So let's move on. You do not have to write this slide. This is something that we did in the past, all right? But I do want to re-go over checks and balances, the definition, and your keywords. Checks and balances is a system of government, or a system that gives each of the three branches of government ways to limit the power of the other two branches. Okay? This was to make sure that one branch didn't become too powerful, abuse their power, and take away the rights of the citizens. So let's look at the keywords. Keywords of the legislative branch. So if you see any of these words on a test, on a quiz, anywhere, it's referring to the legislative branch and how it limits the power of the other two. You will find words like approve. Whoop, hold on one second. Approve, confirm, and reject. Impeach, withhold, ratify, making laws, and override. And that's all the ones I'll need you to know about the legislative branch. Now, for the executive branch, okay, let me get my pointer. Your keywords for the executive branch are going to be session, as in call a special session of Congress, appoint, veto, adjourn. He can also adjourn Congress, just like he calls a special session. And when you see the word veto, that means veto a bill so it doesn't become a law. These are his actual jobs, like carrying out, executing the law, or administering the federal bureaucracy. That's always the executive branch and the president. He can sign a bill into law. He prepares the budget, and he enforces the law. Those are keywords of the executive branch. All right, for our last one, for judicial branch, our keywords are unconstitutional, constitutional, and judicial review. All the other words are things you'll just see with cases, like judge trying a case, and most importantly, interpret the law. And that one's cut off down here, but I don't want to take out my my pointers and stuff and my pins. But anyway, all right, let's move on to the next slide. In this slide, you will see it gives all the jobs and all of the separation of powers. I'm going to move myself up here so I'm not in the way. The jobs of the legislative branch. The legislative branch writes the law, confirms appointments, ratifies treaties, grants money, declares war. Now, the judicial branch interprets the Constitution and other laws and reviews lower court decisions. Okay. Oh, sorry. I got to go back. Anyway, so the judicial branch doesn't have a whole lot of checks, but it does review lower court decisions and practices judicial review, which is determined whether something follows the Constitution. Now, the president can propose laws. That's the State of the Union address, administering the law through the federal bureaucracy, commanding the army, and appointing ambassadors and officials. Okay. Now, what I want to draw your attention to now are some of the actual checks and balances. This will help you on your work today. You'll find it in the black words following the arrows. For example, with the legislative branch can check the president and the executive branch by, hold on, let me get my pointer, by rejecting appointments, rejecting treaties. It can withhold funding from the president, like the actual government's money. They can impeach a president, and they can override a presidential veto if he tries to veto a bill. The legislative branch can check the judicial branch, following this arrow, by proposing an amendment to the Constitution, impeaching a Supreme Court justice, and they can also reject appointments to the Supreme Court. So now let's look at the president over here in the lower left. The president can check the legislative branch by vetoing a bill, and he can adjourn Congress or call a special session of Congress in certain situations. Okay? Now, the president can check the judicial branch by appointing new judges and Supreme Court justices, and that's it. Okay? Now, the judicial branch is a lot easier because it basically does the same thing for both branches. The judicial branch checks the president by declaring executive actions unconstitutional, and the Supreme Court checks the legislative branch by declaring laws that are passed unconstitutional. Please refer back to this for your work and homework today. It will be very, very useful, but that's why this chart is in your notes, okay? All right, so now we're going to actually look at some of the checks and balances in action. This is the checks, how legislative branch checks other branches. The Congress checks the president or the executive branch when they override presidential vetoes, approve or reject the presidential budget or appointments, impeach and convict the president who's sitting, which means basically he's fired. And the Congress can check the courts and the judicial branch when they confirm or reject a federal judge or Supreme Court justice. Okay. Now, if I'm moving too fast, just hit the pause button on the video, and then you can stop that slide, get your notes that way. All right. The final thing I want you to know is that Congress can check the judicial branch by impeaching a judge, just like they can impeach a president. Okay, we're going to move on to our next branch, the executive branch. Now, the executive branch can check, or the president can check Congress when he proposes legislation. This is the State of the Union address. The president prepares an annual budget for Congress to approve. Remember, he can't just say do this, they have to approve it. Vetoing legislation Congress has passed, and calling special sessions of Congress. That one's being covered up a little bit. So now, the president can check the court system or the judicial branch only by appointing new judges or Supreme Court justices. It's a very big power of the president. The next one is called the presidential pardon. Governors of states can do this also since they're chief executives. A pardon eliminates a criminal conviction, and then they release you from prison, and it's not on your record anymore. That's what a pardon is. The judicial branch. Now, the judicial branch, the courts will check Congress when the judges declare acts of Congress to be unconstitutional. And the courts check the president by declaring executive actions to be unconstitutional. So that's each of the three branches, and each of the three branches, how they can check and limit the power of the other two. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. Actually, this is one of our final slides for today. All right, push myself down here a little bit, a little bigger. All right, let's get to it. So to sum all this up, each of the three branches of the national government limits the exercise of power by the other two branches. We just went over all the different ways that they can do this, okay? This is an example of limited government. It just means we limit the power of our government, okay, so they won't abuse their power or take away the rights of the citizens. That concludes my lesson on checks and balances. What you see here will be your exit ticket today. If the president vetoes a bill passed by Congress, which branch is being limited?